I'm so glad you were born safely. Having been discharged from the hospital safely, I couldn't help but mutter to myself in relief. The birth was through a cesarean section. The physical toll was more significant than I had anticipated, and my body still ached from the surgery. However, looking at the babies made me feel it was all worth it. The excitement of starting a new life outweighed the anxiety. Just as I was thinking about taking it easy, my husband, Joseph, spoke up. Let's celebrate tonight. Let's invite all the relatives. My name is Madison. I'm a 27-year-old housewife. My husband, Joseph, is a 29-year-old office worker. We had longed for a child, and finally, our much-awaited child arrived, increasing our family size. I was anxious as it was my first pregnancy, but the gynecologist was very kind and trustworthy. On one of the routine checkup days, I encountered a surprise. Madison, you're having twins! I was so shocked by the doctor's words that all I could say was, "Oh, is that so?" While I loved children and was happy, the anxiety I felt also doubled. When I told my husband, who had returned from work, that we were expecting twins, he said, "Well, I understand the anxiety, but stress isn't good for the fetus. Once they're born, you'll be too busy raising them to think about anything else." He seemed quite unfazed by it. "That's true," I said, though I was still concerned about his reaction. It felt somewhat distant. But if I let myself be crushed by anxiety now, it would affect the babies. I resolved to do what I could for the babies. Encouraged by my husband's words. As the checkups became more frequent, the doctor would say, "Please come in immediately if you have any concerns about your body." Carrying and delivering twins was apparently more taxing on the body. The morning sickness and abdominal tightening were severe, and I experienced discomforts I had never felt before, but I managed to get through each day with help from my husband when needed. As the due date approached, even slight movements made me breathless. It was hard to believe how much my stamina had decreased from before I was pregnant. But there was no time to worry about that. My belly grew quickly, perhaps because I was carrying twins. After discussing with my doctor, we decided on a cesarean section for the delivery. The thought of surgery was frightening, but I was relieved when it was successfully completed, and I heard the crying for the first time. Because the surgery was significant, the physical toll was substantial, and the hospital stay extended. I couldn't move around much immediately due to my condition. The doctor advised me to rest, and I followed those instructions. I had messaged my husband, wanting him to come see the twins since they were safely born. "Today, I have a drinking party with senior members of the company. So, I'm sorry, I can't make it there," was his reply. The next day and the day after. "It's a critical time, so there are many drinking parties. Sorry." He messaged, and ultimately, my husband spent the days following the birth indulging in drinking parties while I was hospitalized. At first, I was concerned about his diet and health, but gradually, my dissatisfaction grew. "What's with that? What's with your company? Our children were just born, you know?" I had the urge to retort that to my husband. In those moments, looking at the children I had given birth to soothed me and helped me remain calm. Before being admitted, despite his complaints, my husband had taken over the tasks I couldn't do. Now, knowing he's working hard for our family, I resolved to do my best with the housework and childcare. Preparing for discharge, I asked the doctor about parenting and shared my anxieties with my parents. Before I knew it, the day of my discharge arrived. I expressed my gratitude to everyone involved during my hospital stay and left the hospital. My husband was there on the day of my discharge. "I'm so glad you were born safely," I muttered to myself, relieved. Stepping outside, breathing in the fresh air made me feel refreshed. Despite the pain from the cesarean section, seeing the twins made me glad I went through with it. I was excited yet anxious about starting a new life. After being discharged safely, the doctor advised me to continue taking it easy. I planned to gradually get accustomed to being active again. As I was thinking this, "Tonight's a celebration," my husband said with a smile. I realized that today was the first day our family of 4 would all be together. Reflecting on how my husband had thought of doing something special for this day while I was in the hospital made me happy. I felt silly for assuming he would just be indulging in drinking parties and not giving it any thought. I told my husband, "I'm so happy you're celebrating. Thank you so much, especially with how busy you are every day." I expressed my gratitude. Upon arriving home, the place was a mess, but I was too tired to care. I soon fell asleep. Suddenly, "There's no time to laze around. It's a celebration party, so could you please put on some makeup and dress up a bit? I've invited all the relatives, so hurry and get ready. I've even booked a large venue," said my husband, raising his voice. I was shocked by his words, having assumed we would celebrate quietly at home with just the 4 of us. And I hadn't been informed about hosting a large party, leaving me unable to comprehend the situation. Just discharged and still feeling weak, I worried about the baby's well-being in a large crowd. "What do you mean by gathering all the relatives? Are you throwing a big party for our baby's birth celebration? I'm sorry, but we can't bring them. It's too risky with a large group for the baby's low immunity." I would have gone myself out of obligation, but I didn't want to expose our children to any danger. After much thought, "Can we postpone it? I'm not fully recovered, and if it's not possible to delay, could you go by yourself?" I firmly said. Then, my husband retorted, "After such a long hospital stay, you're still not recovered? What's the point if the mother of the children doesn't attend the party? You should be back to normal after giving birth, right? Everyone's waiting, so hurry up." He left ahead, leaving me at a loss for words. Left alone bewildered, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. I let out a sigh. I reached for my makeup, pondering if I should go, but couldn't bring myself to proceed. Despite wondering if there was a safe way to bring the twins, I knew there wasn't. Feeling unwell, I thought of contacting Mary, my mother-in-law, hoping she would understand my situation as a woman who has gone through childbirth. I reached for my cell phone. At that moment, a phone call from Mary came. Is it a phone call urging me to hurry to the party? I panicked, but decided to answer with courage. "Hello?" I said, and Mary, sounding a bit rushed. "Hello? Madison? I just wanted to check on something. Is now a good time?" she asked. After I assured her it was okay. "First off, congratulations on your discharge. How are you feeling? I heard from Joseph that you're hosting a baby's debut party right after being discharged today. Is that true?" Mary said, seizing the opportunity. "About that, I was just suddenly informed by Joseph a while ago. I've had a cesarean section, and the wound is still hurting. Plus, I don't think it's good for the twins to be in a place with many people, so I'm not in a condition to attend." I explained. Mary responded, "That's understandable. A party on the day of your discharge is unthinkable. He had me believing you were okay with it, which surprised me. I'll give that foolish son of mine a call and explain from scratch about childbirth and postpartum. Please, rest at home." Relieved, I couldn't help but say, "That's great," and slumped down where I was. However, a few minutes later, my husband called. as soon as I answered. Hey! Did you complain about me to Mom? I got an earful from her. Look, childbirth is over, so anything you say now just sounds like excuses. And about the baby's immunity you were worried about, it's not like we're going to a crowded shopping mall. It's just family, so it should be fine. Women always overreact. You're a mom now, so you need to get your act together, he said, realizing my husband doesn't listen to women. I hung up the phone, dumbfounded. Shortly after, the doorbell rang. Thinking my husband had returned, impatient for me, I went to check and found Mary, infuriated, standing there. Madison, I'm sorry for the trouble Joseph has caused you, she said, offering me a gift. I know it might be too much, but I thought this might be a tough time for you, so I came to help. Mary asked if she could come in. Honestly, it's a bit of a mess, but I really appreciate it, I replied, letting her in. Joseph never listens to me, so I'm thinking of calling Dad later too, Mary said. Curious about what Joseph would say in front of David, my father-in-law, I asked to listen in on that call. Mary continued. I've already called the relatives. They said it's okay to just pass some small gifts at your home. It had been a while since I'd seen the relatives. I felt bad but was glad they were willing to come over, as I had been looking forward to seeing them under normal circumstances. Thank you so much. I expressed my gratitude to Mary, and just as I was about to get up to clean, she quickly intervened. Madison, you've just had surgery. Your recovery is the most important thing right now, and as a mom, you should focus all your energy on the babies. Leave the cleaning to me. She then swiftly cleaned up the mess that had accumulated while my husband had neglected the house during my hospital stay. Really, Joseph can't do anything on his own. Madison, thank you always for everything. Her words offered me great comfort. Thanks to her, I could focus on my babies, finding time to sleep between feedings. Once the cleaning was done and things had settled, David and the relatives arrived. They had been invited by my husband but rushed over after Mary called them to explain the situation and scold my husband. It's been a while. Congratulations. I received their blessings and gifts one after another, feeling very happy. Only the in-laws met the baby, as the relatives waited in the living room without entering the room. My husband was not around, probably still waiting somewhere for me to arrive. David, having heard the situation from Mary, I'm sorry for the trouble Joseph has caused. I'm about to call him now, is that okay? He asked. Having just been harshly spoken to by Joseph, I was accustomed to it and curious about everything he thought and did. It's okay. Please feel free to call him. It's something I requested, I replied. David then called my husband. Suddenly, we could hear some noise in the background. Hello? Oh, Dad? Where is everyone? My husband sounded confused on the phone. David pretended he was the only one there and questioned my husband. I heard you were planning a big party today. That would be too much for Madison, who's just been discharged. Why would you plan something so reckless? As David spoke. Recently, I've been going out drinking and having fun with colleagues, discovering the joy of parties. While Madison was in the hospital, I could do as I pleased, but with the children born, that's not possible anymore. So, I thought we'd have Madison prepare everything and have fun today. Dad, you must have thought the same before your kids were born, right? Everyone present grimaced at my husband's nonchalant response, lumping all men together in his justification. David, holding back his anger. It's too much for Madison right now, so the party's off. But we've gathered the relatives at your house. They'll be here soon, so come back quickly. He tried to keep his composure as he spoke. It seemed like David restrained his anger, as it might deter my husband from returning if he said everyone is waiting angrily. My husband replied, Really? Okay, I'm at the arcade with colleagues. I'll head back once we're at a good stopping point. With a seemingly cheerful tone, my husband said those words, perhaps thinking that men would sympathize with each other no matter what. The phone conversation had shed light on many aspects of my husband, and I felt a sense of despair as we were about to start parenting. David asserted, I will never forgive Joseph for this. Madison, I'm sorry for imposing during such a tough time at your home. I'm going to set that fool straight today. Please give us a chance. The relatives also showed their support. Madison, we're on your side. If there's anything troubling you, please let us know. Their warm words almost brought me to tears. Upon his return, my husband greeted the gathered visitors. Thank you all for coming. Please, make yourselves at home. He entered the room formally, glanced around the living room, and seeing me in the bedroom. Hey, Madison, at least offer some coffee to my parents. He whispered angrily. In-laws were furious upon hearing this. Mary said, I told Madison to focus on taking care of the children. Don't bother her. Since you're the one who wanted this party, why don't you handle the preparations? Defending me. David also scolded. Joseph, enough is enough. Move yourself before you speak. How can you leave everything to Madison right after childbirth? What kind of nerve do you have? I retorted. You plan a party on your own, but leave the preparation to me while you leisurely hang out at an arcade? Don't make me laugh. Seems like you had quite the fun roaming around while I was hospitalized. My husband's face turning red. You eavesdropped on the conversation with Dad? You're the lowest. He avoided apologizing or addressing his actions. Then, a male relative with children courageously confronted my husband. How can you treat Madison like she's invisible? I heard from Mom that a cesarean section is extremely tough. My wife went through it too, and just looking at the wound makes you realize the pain. You think it's all over once the baby is born, don't you? She had surgery on her abdomen, he said. In fact, among the relatives, there were families with many children and those who had experienced cesarean sections. Look, perhaps you never visited Madison in the hospital, that's why you can say such things. Just one look at the wound, and you'll understand the ordeal of childbirth and why she can't strain herself. A mother among them persuaded. Some relatives were furious. Being scolded by so many made my husband start to understand that the women weren't exaggerating. For the first time, he appeared so diminished and small. With the strong support of in-laws and relatives, I felt fearless. After everyone left, I was wrong earlier. I haven't experienced childbirth, nor have I been involved in childcare yet, but I was speaking out of turn. Hearing from the relative who's already a dad made me realize my immaturity. I'm truly sorry. My husband hastily apologized. However, his apology seemed calculated, as if performing in public would gain forgiveness. I hoped his apology wouldn't just be words, but followed by actions. The in-laws felt the same and visited only when my husband was around, helping clean if I hadn't managed to, which was a great help. They declared to let my husband take charge of the baby care as much as possible, supporting him in the process. I'm sorry for everything. Thank you so much. I expressed my gratitude. It's okay. Please make sure to rest well. It would be terrible if you overdid it and something happened. And Mary reassured me. My husband declared, All right, I'm going to be more involved in parenting. I'll become a cool dad like the celebrities on TV. Getting all excited. Then, David immediately retorted. What you should aim for is to be a good husband and a good dad. Instead of trying to emulate what's on TV, pay attention to Madison and the twins right in front of you and act accordingly. His words made me burst into laughter. Even with the support of the in-laws, my husband realized how hard it was to take care of newborn twins, even for a short while. It's exhausting. My body aches, and I'm always on edge. Yet, he made an effort. He began to appreciate how hard I worked during the day, expressing his gratitude daily. Though still a bit clumsy, he has become capable of managing the household chores on his own. I cannot thank the in-laws enough for making my husband aware. As a result, we have become a couple that respects each other and continues to maintain a good relationship with the in-laws. As our children grew, I know new challenges and worries will arise, but I look forward to overcoming them together. You're only useful for giving birth to an heir. Karen, my mother-in-law, said as she hugged my son tightly and nuzzled his cheek. The same mother-in-law who was so kind before I had a child, now glared at me with an expression I'd never seen before. The realization hit me hard as she continued to berate me nonstop. This was her true nature. Speechless, I watched as Karen laughed. I'll make sure to raise this child as a proper heir. My name is Abigail. I'm 28 years old, and I've been married to Christopher for 4 years now. We met in college and got married after graduating. His hometown is a plane ride away from my hometown. I had planned to attend a nearby university and work in my hometown, but those plans changed completely. Christopher, a year older than me, received a job offer in his hometown and moved back right after graduation. We ended up in a long-distance relationship for about a year, but we were doing well. Both of us were raised by single parents and had to work part-time outside of our classes to pay for our tuition. We never really went on typical dates and were used to not seeing each other often. Once he started working, Christopher seemed to have more free time and would often check in on me. You're not a kid anymore. Take a good look at your own mom, he'd say, but he was still worried about me. Time flew by, and soon it was time for me to finish my studies and decide on a job offer. I was expected to get my childcare certification, so I hoped to work in a daycare. The job offers were from daycares in my hometown and his. Moving to his hometown meant we could get married as planned. However, my mom was living alone in my hometown. My grandmother had passed away just before I went to college, leaving her feeling lonely. I had decided to return home after graduation, but started to waver after dating Christopher. Neither my mom nor Christopher pressured me. I often talked to my mom about Christopher over the phone, so she was okay with the marriage, and Christopher, having been raised in a single-parent household as well, understood my feelings towards my mom very well. After much deliberation, I decided to marry Christopher. It helped that the job prospects in his hometown were better, and Karen seemed to really like me. At first, we lived in the apartment Christopher had already been renting. Unlike when I was a student, I made sure to contribute half of our living expenses from my own salary. As we both worked, we had a bit more financial leeway, allowing us to go on overnight trips once a month. We felt like we had truly grown up and even started thinking about having children when suddenly, our apartment was nearly destroyed in a fire. The cause was unclear, but it was suspected to be due to another resident's negligence. Fortunately, there were no injuries, and we weren't home at the time. However, losing all our furniture, appliances, and possessions that we had only had for a few years was a huge shock. Karen caught wind of the fire that very day and immediately rushed over in a taxi, finding us standing in shock in front of our charred apartment. She ushered us into her car and headed straight to her house, having seen the breaking news on TV. From now on, you two should just live with us at home. Come on, no need for such gloomy faces. Despite her assertiveness, her words gradually lifted our spirits. With little more than the clothes on our backs, we found everything we needed at my in-laws' house. The family once being farmers, their land and house were spacious, with more rooms than Karen could use, so she prepared one for us. Thus, a temporary living arrangement with Karen was smoothly decided, and Christopher apologized, feeling indebted. You have nothing to apologize for. Rather, we're incredibly grateful. Karen treated me like her own daughter and was youthful and lively. She accepted our working lifestyles and took on most of the household chores. Feeling it was wrong to leave everything to her, I helped out on weekends. Abigail, you're such a hard worker. You should rest on weekends. Besides, you contribute more than enough to the household expenses. After many discussions, my husband and I decided to settle down in this house. We'll contribute to the household expenses in exchange for taking care of the house, my husband prefaced before explaining our cohabitation arrangement. Karen was delighted, her eyes sparkling with joy. Leave the housework to me. It's embarrassing, but I can't earn money outside like you two anymore. Having you here makes every day fun. I'm looking forward to our future together. And so, our permanent living arrangement with Karen was decided. Thanks to Karen, I could focus on my job, and a year passed smoothly. However, I began to feel unwell. Karen noticed something was off and urged me to go to the hospital. Despite lacking clear symptoms like coughing or sneezing, I felt an unusual tiredness and nausea, so I took some time off and went to the gynecologist. There, I discovered I was pregnant. Though unexpected, the ultrasound clearly showed a new life. Returning home with trembling steps of joy, Karen greeted me with concern. Upon hearing the news of my pregnancy, Karen clapped her hands in delight and started preparing a feast. Of course, my husband was thrilled too. Seeing my husband caress my belly, Karen advised. From now on, it's going to be tougher for Abigail, so you need to step up. Watching them, I felt determined to do my best for the baby. During checkups, we learned it was a boy, and Karen, ecstatic about her first grandson, was overjoyed. Afterward, Karen became even more attentive to my well-being, closely monitoring my every move. While her concern for me was manageable, her behavior towards my husband was a bit much. Insisting he read thick parenting books and meticulously instructing us on the changes in my body and baby's development. Having a knowledgeable partner in parenting was helpful, but with both of us working, Karen's intense approach was a bit worrying. Karen seemed to have a strong desire for a boy. Though the necessity of continuing the family business had ceased, the pressure of not ending the long-standing family name weighed heavily on her. Indeed, Karen herself faced considerable pressure from relatives until she became pregnant with my husband. Even after his birth, she was extensively advised on parenting by her late husband's father and his mother, which might explain why Karen is so overzealous now, I thought. Upon entering a stable phase, I informed my workplace and discussed maternity and parental leave dates. Karen repeatedly suggested, "Why don't you quit your job right now? Isn't it harmful to your health?" But each time, I firmly resisted. Honestly, as days passed, Karen seemed to become overprotective towards me, and being at work provided a breather from that. I wanted to genuinely enjoy the anticipation of the baby's arrival, but felt stifled in such an environment. Yet, I couldn't discuss this with my husband, who was under even stricter scrutiny from Karen. At times, Karen seemed almost possessed. Eventually, enduring the pressure, I safely gave birth to a boy. Karen visited every day during my hospital stay, holding the baby as long as she could. A nurse had to subtly hint for her to leave. It felt absurdly excessive, even for a first grandchild. The strangeness became apparent soon after. Karen had arrived early on discharge day, having persuaded a known taxi service to bring her. The nurse rushed preparations upon hearing this, leaving me filled with apologies towards the hospital staff. It turned out Karen was held back by the reception until official patient release time. During this period, Karen called me multiple times directly.
I came because I was worried about you and the baby. I want to see you as soon as possible,
she said tearfully, despite having seen us the day before. I couldn't firmly address her as she came in place of my busy husband. And after a few hours, we were finally greeted by Karen's embrace outside. Karen didn't let go of my son the entire ride home, but considering she had waited for hours, I overlooked it. Once home, I immediately changed my son's diaper, with Karen anxiously hovering. The moment I stepped away, she quickly took him in her arms. Addressing Karen, I mentioned, "I need to start the laundry from the hospital stay." No response came. Repeating myself,
Just hurry up. I'm busy, don't talk to me."
She glared at me in a way I'd never seen before. Stunned by her sudden change, Karen continued without regard.
"Relatives are coming, so prepare the dishes. I've already done the cooking."
She pointed towards the kitchen with her chin, signaling me, "Go." Such a drastic transformation was bewildering. Without time to settle, I began preparing for the visitors, feeling pain throughout my unrecovered body. When my son cried for feeding, Karen reluctantly handed him over, but otherwise stayed close, unwilling to part. Karen's interest was solely focused on my son. What was supposed to be about 5 guests turned into 10, including some neighbors who weren't even relatives. Understandably, I was too busy preparing to greet anyone. While I was groaning in postpartum pain, one of the female guests noticed.
"Hey, are you okay?"
she asked. Before I could respond, Karen interjected loudly. "She just got discharged today."
You know how these modern women exaggerate their postpartum recovery.
"Just discharged? Sit down right away. We'll handle the rest," the woman said, triggering a commotion among the gathered guests, who seemed to have been uninformed. Some attempted to stand up, possibly upset by the situation. Karen, perhaps panicking, started showing off my son to each guest, boasting, "None of you have an heir, do you? Better hurry up." The atmosphere instantly tensed. As everyone watched in astonishment, Karen's tirade continued unabated.
"I endured pressure from my husband, Karen, and their relatives to give birth to my son, raised him alone after my husband passed away, and now, my son has produced another son, continuing the lineage. While you all idle away, some of you don't have much time left. I won't be responsible for what happens."
And, as Karen laughed derisively, guests began leaving, despite the unfinished conversation. The meticulously prepared food remained untouched as everyone departed.
Oh dear, what a waste of food. They should have enjoyed themselves more.
Now, off you go.
Christopher and I will take good care of this child."
"Huh?" Suddenly, Karen turned and pointed at me.
"You've given us an heir, so you're no longer needed here. Go back to your beloved job or whatever. You're dispensable to me now. Could you leave immediately, leaving the child behind? Or try for a second son if you wish to be favored again."
Faced with Karen's sarcastic smile, something inside me snapped.
"Understood. I'll be leaving."
My belongings were untouched since returning from the hospital, so I packed some clothes and personal items, ready to carry them. Karen, having lost interest in me, didn't bother to see me off, instead laying my son on a new bed and heading to the bathroom. Without waiting for a send-off I didn't want, I decided to leave.
I'll leave the child with you then. Please take care of everything.
That was the last thing I said to Karen, who, unsurprisingly, didn't respond. I boarded a bus with my luggage, planning to rest at a nearby hotel. The next day, still in pain, I checked out, planning to head home by intercity bus. Upon powering up my mobile phone, I found a slew of missed calls from Karen. Turning off my phone the night before had been the right move, anticipating this situation. When Karen called again, I decided to answer.
What's going on? I was worried because I couldn't reach you. Where are you now? You're not worried about me, are you? Just answer the question. Where are you? I'm heading back to my parents' house with my son. That's not what we agreed on.
Karen screamed until her voice cracked. Why?
I left your child, Christopher, behind, didn't I? I'm taking my son to my parents.
Whether Karen grasped the situation or not, she let out a growl like a beast. Since she had entered the bathroom and hadn't seen me when I was leaving the in-laws' house, she hadn't realized I took my son with me. She must have left the bathroom after I was completely gone, too late to catch up with me. That led to her calling me incessantly, until she finally reached me once I turned my phone back on. Without informing my husband of my departure, both must have been in a panic. Though it was harsh on my husband, I had to get away from Karen.
It's cruel to drag a newborn around for hours. You brought over 10 people the day I was discharged. I'm in a much better situation. Besides, my mom came to pick us up, so we're resting on the way. Oh, and my mom said she won't let my son see you again, so we won't be in contact anymore. Thanks for everything. Take care.
I hung up without waiting for Karen's reply, blocked her number, and headed straight home. Upon reaching home, my mom had already prepared a clean baby bed.
It's been tough. You must be exhausted. We can talk later, just rest now.
My son had been constantly crying since yesterday, and realizing the hardship I put him through brought me to tears, while my mom comforted me. It was a moment of release from all the tension. My son, oblivious to my state, brought brightness to our once solitary home, as my mom effortlessly soothed him. A month passed, and just as I started to relax, an unknown number called. I had a bad feeling about it. Sure enough, the caller was Karen.
Where did you take my son? Are you there?
Hearing Karen's voice after a while, it seemed much aged.
Taking Christopher along with the heir, how cruel.
Knowing arguing was futile, I handed the phone to my husband beside me.
Hello, Mom. It's Christopher. The business trip I mentioned was a lie. I've been talking with Abigail and her mom for the past month, and I'm shocked at how you've changed. I can't believe you treated Abigail so poorly. I have to prioritize my wife and son. A moving company will collect my belongings soon, so don't touch the boxes in the storage. Also, I've quit my job, so calling there is pointless. Please don't contact us anymore.
My husband ended the call, making a difficult decision to cut ties quickly to avoid developing any further attachment. The day after I left my in-laws' house, I received a message from my husband. He decided to cut ties with Karen immediately after learning she had tried to take my son from me and driving me out. He promptly informed his company of the situation, processed his resignation, and secretly packed his belongings. Reunited with our son who had taken refuge here, my husband cried for a long time as he held him. With my husband's help, childcare became manageable and I finally felt at ease. He has already started looking for a new job. With the skills he's developed in his previous job, he's likely to find a good position, even as a mid-career hire. We soon moved out of our house. The land cost a bit more, so my mom covered all the initial expenses for the new home. After our move, Karen, in a panic, flew to our old address, only to find the house demolished and the lot empty. Eventually, she called my husband, learning about our relocation. My husband then blocked Karen's number, cutting off her last means of contact with us. Messages from a cousin my husband has always been close to occasionally reach him. According to these messages, Karen has become the neighborhood's laughingstock, a lonely old woman who lost her grandson, son, and daughter-in-law. Especially among those gathered on the day I was discharged, who Karen had always boasted to about giving birth to Christopher, now ridicule her. The neighbors have teamed up to spread bad words about Karen, who, unable to bear the situation, sold her house and disappeared. The hoarseness in her voice when she last called might have been due to the treatment she was already receiving. What goes around comes around, indeed. I hope Karen lives her remaining years with dignity, remembering this lesson. As for us, we are constantly facing new challenges every day. I can't take my eyes off our son's daily growth, and my mom seems rejuvenated by his energy. My husband's re-employment went smoothly, and he treasures the moments with our son amidst his busy schedule. Surrounded by people who cherish my son and me, I'm living a peaceful and happy life.
You're definitely younger and better than Kaylee. Yay, happy! Let's date a bit longer.
Exhausted from my business trip, I was greeted by such words from my husband Vince and my sister Celine. After mocking me, I started to hear their unpleasant voices. For a moment, I thought about yelling at them. Instead, I quickly regained my composure and took out my mobile phone. Then I slightly opened the bedroom door and recorded decisive evidence. They were too engrossed to notice.
How dare you two belittle me like this?
I won't forgive them. I've been insulted too much. No need for mercy. I sent the evidence I recorded to Carl, Celine's husband. We prepared to confront them. When they saw us, they were shocked.
Kaylee? Why are you here? Right. And why are you here too, Carl?
Kaylee told me. At those words, Celine glared at me. To her, I extended an envelope. Their faces turned pale upon seeing its contents. My name is Kaylee. I'm a 33-year-old working mother, raising my son Alex while working hard. I'm not blood related to my parents. My mother was infertile and adopted me from a foster home.
You are such a sweet child, my dear Kaylee.
Yes, we're so glad you became our daughter. I'm deeply grateful to my parents who accepted me. A year after I was adopted, my mother got pregnant with her own daughter after fertility treatments. The baby was named Celine. Since then, we've been raised as sisters, not related by blood.
Kaylee, what are your plans for the future?
Don't hold back for us.
I actually have a university I want to attend.
Then, I left my hometown for college. I didn't return after graduating, joining a company in Boston. I've been successful in my field of expertise. For about 10 years, I've worked hard every day.
Kaylee, can I talk to you?
One day, my boss called me in. The discussion was about recommending me for a chief position. I joyfully accepted and returned to my desk.
You seem happy, what's up?
Then, my husband Vince spoke to me. He was younger than me, and I was his mentor at one point. After the mentoring period, he actively pursued me.
Actually, it was love at first sight. Will you date me?
Overwhelmed by his enthusiasm, I agreed to date him. Eventually, we married when I got pregnant. We then had our lovely son, Alex. The early days were tough with work and child rearing, but Vince's support made it enjoyable. On one holiday, my family went out together.
Is that Kaylee? Oh. Can it be? Celine?
A young woman called out to us. At first, I didn't recognize her, but soon realized it was my stepsister Celine.
Long time no see, Vince.
Hi, Celine.
You guys bring Alex, so it's a family outing? I'd love to join.
Her words made me uncomfortable. We were shopping for our son. If she joined, she'd want to go here and there, making it hard to buy what we needed.
Today is a day for the three of us to shop leisurely. So, you can't join.
Why not? You're so mean. Ignoring her whims, I pushed Vince and Alex's back and started walking. Still complaining, she tried to follow, but we managed to shake her off and entered a nearby store for lunch.
Oh dear, I can't believe we ran into each other here.
As eating, I reminisced about the past. Our parents had loved both the adopted and biological child equally. They had cherished me more than ever.
It's because Kaylee came that the baby did too.
Kaylee brought us happiness. Therefore, I intended to treasure Celine too. However, my feelings didn't reach her. As she grew up, she became demanding.
Kaylee always gets everything. I want what Kaylee has, too. I want what Kaylee has. I really want it. Give it to me.
It started with a keychain, though it was something I bought matching with a friend. Under strong pleading and seeing our troubled parents, I gave it to her. That seemed to encourage her. After that, she kept saying everything was unfair and tried to take things from me. Luckily, our parents were on my side and scolded her, and the age gap limited what she could take.
I'm being harassed by my sister.
Unsatisfied with the situation, Celine targeted my friends next. She went around, saying,
I'm bullied because we're not blood related.
She was good at crying, and my classmates started avoiding me. Some even said terrible things or harassed me.
That's impossible. Kaylee has always adored Celine.
One of my friends, Dina, who bought the matching keychain, believed in me. She fought back against the classmates who harassed me and warned Celine.
Don't lie.
So, Celine and Dina never got along. After distancing from Celine when I went to college, life had been peaceful. But recently, she got married and started living nearby. I sighed at the unexpected encounter.
Mom, are you okay?
Worried, Alex spoke to me. I smiled and brushed it off. Are you really okay? You're worried about Celine, right? While resuming eating, Vince asked me. I told him about Celine, especially something I hadn't spoken about until then. I didn't know she was like that. Vince and Celine had only met a few times, at family meetings or our wedding. I also hadn't brought up Celine in conversation before. Why not vent to Dina? I don't know Celine well enough.
Dina?
Yes. How about next week? I'll take care of Alex in the meantime. I nodded to his suggestion and contacted Dina right away. A week later, I finally got to talk to Dina. Sorry to keep you waiting, Kaylee.
No, I should be sorry for the sudden call.
I heard about the encounter and rushed to investigate. When I mentioned Celine, Dina said and pulled out an investigation report. I was impressed with her skills. Dina used her observational and acting skills as a detective. Her abilities were top-notch.
Impressive as always. Let's see it.
I looked over the report. It detailed Celine's recent actions. Even after I left home, she continued to play the villain and did as she pleased. She played the role of the poor little sister, tormented by her adoptive elder sister. It seemed she used that narrative to attract men, but those relationships always ended quickly.
I can't believe such good parents ended up with a child like that.
Reading it, I couldn't help but feel astonished. Hey, how are you doing with Vince? Suddenly, Dina asked me so. Tilting my head, I replied that everything was as usual.
He's really involved in parenting, and he's even taking care of Alex today.
Responding so, she looked somewhat troubled. Again, I tilted my head.
Is something wrong?
No, it's nothing. If that's the case, it's fine. She denied my inquiry. After chatting for a while, we parted with smiles.
Oh, Alex and Vince?
Huh?
Hi, Mom.
On the way home, I met up with Vince, who was leading Alex by the hand.
Were you guys out somewhere?
Yeah, we thought of getting out of the house for a bit, so we went shopping.
Oh really? Did you have fun?
At my question, Alex nodded with a hesitant, yeah. He tilted his head. He was sticking close to me without saying anything. Come on, let's get home quickly. Though puzzled, I was hurried home by Vince. Throughout, Alex stayed close to me.
What do you want for dinner?
I'll prepare it, Vince said, entering the kitchen.
Should I help?
No, it's fine. Can you keep Alex company? He seems to have missed Mom. Thanking him for his words, I turned to face Alex. Then, as if deciding something, listen, Mom? He began to speak in a voice low enough that Vince couldn't hear. Shocked, but determined, I made a decision. Soon after, I received a call from Dina. Kaylee, I need to talk to you about Vince. She told me a truth, and we decided to take action.
I wonder if you can go with him.
It happened shortly afterward. I was asked to go on a business trip. When I consulted Vince, go ahead, he replied casually.
As for Alex, can I leave him with my parents?
That's fine, but I can take care of him?
You come home later than me. I'm worried.
Acknowledging my concern, that's true. He agreed. With Alex's consent, I left him with my parents. After explaining the situation to them, they said, leave it to us. Then, I left Alex with them and headed to the business trip location. I planned to go with a colleague.
That's the situation. You might need to help.
Understood. I discussed various things with him and made plans. I told Vince I would be gone for a week, but the work finished early, and I returned in 3 days.
Then, I'll see you soon.
After parting with my colleague, we each headed home. I didn't contact Vince at that point, but called Dina. After receiving some advice, I steeled myself and entered the house.
I'm home.
I called out, but of course, there was no reply. Vince should have been at work at that time. However, I sensed someone in the house and saw familiar coats, including his. So, I stealthily entered the house. As expected, voices came from the bedroom.
You're definitely younger and better than Kaylee. Yay, happy! Let's date a bit longer.
Exhausted from my business trip, I was greeted by such words from Vince and Celine. After mocking me, I started to hear their unpleasant voices. For a moment, I thought about yelling at them. Instead, I quickly regained my composure and took out my mobile phone. Then, I slightly opened the bedroom door and recorded decisive evidence. They were too engrossed to notice.
How dare you two belittle me like this?
I won't forgive them. I've been insulted too much. No mercy was needed, I suppose. I had sent the evidence I shot to Celine's husband, Carl. Thanks for the photo. He finally made a move, huh? Carl hurried over as soon as he could. Seems he also reached out to Dina. Having them both come gave me a sense of relief. Well, shall we storm in? We got ready and headed to the scene.
What are you two doing?
The two of them were shocked to see us.
Kaylee? Why are you here? Right. And why are you here too, Carl?
Kaylee told me. At those words, Celine glared at me. I responded by handing her an envelope.
Answer my question too.
That's when Vince said, looking my way. I thought it was a hassle, but I decided to respond.
My business trip ended in 3 days. I was also accompanying on the trip as her colleague.
In fact, Celine's husband Carl was my colleague as well as Dina's real brother. So, I was able to discuss the situation with him during the trip and even managed to call Dina.
Are you satisfied? Why don't you check the contents?
Dina urged with a laugh, but her eyes weren't smiling, those made them both shudder. When they saw what was inside, their faces turned pale. This is the infidelity I caught on camera. Good shots, aren't they? Right, the contents were of their affair. They never expected such evidence to surface.
Why is there such a thing?
I've been investigating you for a while.
What?
Actually, Dina had been investigating Vince for a different case. Vince wasn't just involved with Celine, but also with his coworker at the office. Eventually, the coworker's parents suspected him and happened to hire Dina's detective agency.
You've been messing around with others too.
Upon seeing the name, Dina realized it was my husband, Vince. She started investigating after sensing his betrayal. The investigation revealed that Vince had been approaching various women, not only Celine but the other female staff. That's,
Can't you be satisfied with just me?
Vince got pale with trembling. Whereas, Celine was angry at the revelation of his other involvements. You're hardly in a position to complain, Carl said coldly, silencing her instantly. He glared coldly at Celine. What are you even doing, even being married to me?
That's, well.
Celine scrambled for an excuse with teary eyes. Standing next to Carl, Dina was making her arms crossed. Their angry expressions were so similar as siblings. Thinking so, I began packing.
Kaylee? What are you doing? I'm packing because I'm divorcing you.
Vince asked fearfully, but I told him clearly.
Wait for me. Forgive me.
He begged, but I ignored. I'll carry your luggage.
Oh, thank you.
My pleasure. I'll have your luggage sent to your parents' house. Carl helped me with my luggage, and we left the house smiling. Although Vince and Celine screamed after us, Dina scolded sharply.
Enough already. You idiots.
They immediately silenced with a scream. Leaving them behind, we left the house briskly. After I parted ways with Dina and Carl, I returned to my parents' house where Alex was.
They were indeed cheating.
I had to tell my parents that Celine was having an affair with Vince. Hearing that, they sighed deeply and apologized to me.
Don't apologize, it's not your fault.
I had been informed about the affair by Dina beforehand. The day after she told me, my parents shared it with me. I can't keep this to myself. The evidence from Dina alone would have been enough for a divorce settlement. But somewhere in my heart, I wanted to believe in Vince. That's why I didn't file for divorce until I saw it with my own eyes.
Alex, were you a good boy?
Feeling sorry for my parents, I changed the subject. Then, my parents smiled. He was as good as you. A really kind boy. Alex smiled happily, being praised by his beloved grandparents. I was glad I had left him here.
Can we stay here a bit longer?
At my request, my parents readily agreed. A few hours later, while chatting with my parents and eating snacks, Celine barged in.
There you are. It's all your fault. I'm getting a divorce from Carl. If only you weren't here.
She yelled at me, glaring, just as I was about to hug scared Alex and counter.
Get out! You're no daughter of ours.
My parents shouted back at her instead. Then, her attention shifted to my parents.
What are you two talking about? I'm your real daughter. Our daughter is only Kaylee. You became unbearable, spoiled by my mother. We can't think of you as our daughter anymore.
My parents responded in a dismayed tone to Celine's words. Certainly, it was our grandmother who led Celine astray. She never accepted me as an adopted child, and doted on Celine as her biological child. As a result, Celine never listened to our parents and used me, the adopted one, as she pleased.
I always wanted to be true sisters with you.
Celine seemed angered by that.
You always act so superior. Even though you're not a real child, it's annoying. You even have a child. I couldn't even have one with Carl.
She ranted. True, she had no children. But that was her own doing. After continuing relationships with men, she became infertile.
You have no right to say that to me. Shut up.
She raised her hand to me. Just as I braced myself, I saw Alex stepped between us. This is bad, he might get hurt.
Enough.
Before she could reach Alex, my father grabbed her hand and threw her out. Watching her leave, I hugged Alex.
Don't do anything dangerous again.
Sorry, I just wanted to protect Mom. As my parents said, Alex really was a good boy. I thanked him and stroked his head. After that, Celine apparently reluctantly went to Vince's place. Carl and I demanded a settlement from them both in the divorce. They had multiple partners, so the amount was substantial. Vince got sued for marriage fraud by his colleagues too. Dina updated me on their situation later. Furthermore, Vince was caught cheating during work hours. Of course, he was fired eventually. Before he was resigned, he approached me once.
Please, Kaylee. Help me.
He was lying in wait outside my company and clung to me as I arrived. Ignoring him and trying to enter the office, he kept obstructing me.
If you're going to cling like that, why did you cheat? I know you approached them. No way.
True, Vince was the one who approached first. That day, after I went to bed, he found Celine's address and visited her during a business trip. She was at home and welcomed him. Kaylee made you upset yesterday, he had said, and they apparently started their affair.
You confronted Celine for me, Dina.
After we each returned home, I told Dina about Celine's visit. Knowing that Alex was almost hurt, Dina got angered and went to the thrown-out Celine's place. She was caught by Dina without a chance to escape. It seemed she spilled everything when confronted, due to her trauma.
Did you really think I'd help you? You know, I was serious about you.
What is he even talking about? If that was the case, he shouldn't have cheated in the first place. As I was thinking so and about to call the police on my mobile phone, please stop.
I will sue for business obstruction.
Just then Carl arrived. He pulled me to his side and gave Vince a cold look.
You are not needed in our company.
Huh? In fact, Carl is the next president of the company. He was training to become that position under my mentoring.
You're kidding!
Unaware of that, Vince looked at him in disbelief.
It's no lie.
Just leave. From his demeanor, it was clear he wasn't reconsidering. Disheartened, Vince left. On the other hand, Celine had knew about Carl being the next company president. Moreover, she was genuinely in love with him. Getting divorced was really hard. Carl said that, and I patted him on the shoulder. He smiled at me, looking a bit troubled. Then later, I was called by the current president.
Excuse me.
Thanks for your time. A great help for Carl. And it's a pity about Vince. He began to discuss the matter, looking somewhat complex. Troubled by the recent events, Carl would be training at a subsidiary for a while. Indeed, physical distance from Celine might be better. So, I want to entrust you with the project that was planned for Carl. Of course, the promotion to chief we originally planned remains. I felt honored and accepted. Without Vince, I could still live well. My parents agreed to look after Alex as I would be busy. In fact, Vince had never looked after Alex when we were married. I was actually staying with Grandpa and Grandma. Alex was left with Vince's parents' house, and it seemed they weren't happy about it. He secretly told me that day. I vowed not to let him go through that again. Fortunately, my parents, who were not related by blood, cherished him as their own grandchild. With no more worries, I dedicated myself even more to my work. It seemed Carl successfully distanced himself from Celine. He's doing well in the subsidiary. I had a tea party with Dina when things settled down. She told me about Carl.
Carl has always been hardworking. He'll be fine.
Yeah, but could you visit him sometime? I'll take care of Alex. She asked, and I tilted my head. I didn't mind meeting him, but the way Dina said it, it seemed like she wanted us to meet alone. Well, you'll understand once you meet him. She smiled mischievously. I didn't understand the situation, but I decided to meet Carl. Dina was looking after Alex at a distance.
Were you surprised I wanted to meet? Yes, well, I've been wondering how you were doing since then.
Thanks to you. It's still new, but I'm trying my best. He spoke with a smile. I felt bad for the trouble caused by Celine, and wanted him to find happiness. Then, looking serious, he gazed at me. I like you, Kaylee.
What?
I was shocked by his sudden confession. Apparently, he had liked me from the beginning. However, due to the age difference, I only saw him like a brother. So, he had given up on me. I got together with Celine when she comforted me. Celine knew he liked me and took advantage of it. After I married Vince, Carl completely moved on and decided to marry Celine. I did love Celine. I don't know what she thought or why she approached me, but she was a support. Celine must have truly loved Carl too. That's why she chose to marry him among many men. Therefore, she was so furious at me for the divorce. When I found out about Celine's betrayal through Dina, I was quite shocked.
Carl, you've had it tough. But I'm sorry, I can't feel that way yet. Besides, I want to prioritize Alex now.
I understand. I'm not in a hurry for an answer. Carl said that with a laugh. Feeling his loving gaze, my heart raced. Mom, are you done talking?
Yes, we're done.
I turned my attention to Alex, who had run up to us. Picking up the now heavier Alex, he smiled happily in my arms. Alex. I hope we can continue to be friends. You and I are already friends, aren't we? Carl is Alex's uncle, and they often play together. With a nod from Alex, Carl replied with a smile. You're right. Our time together might lessen, but but I hope we can stay as close as before. Sure. Alex nodded with a smile, and Carl gently stroked his head. Then, Carl would come to see us whenever he found time. Alex had grown quite fond of him, who paid more attention to him than Vince ever did.
Kaylee! Alex! Oh my goodness. Why are you here?
While playing in the park, the disheveled Vince appeared. Apparently, Celine had been rampaging daily since her divorce from Carl. Both having paid a hefty divorce settlement, they couldn't afford to replace the furniture and appliances Celine destroyed. Thus, he looked unkempt. Dad's not around anymore, huh? Let's be together again, the three of us. I don't need you, Dad. Alex cut off his words firmly. He then froze.
What?
Are you saying you hate Mom and me?
No, I'm not.
Carl is here for us now. So, we don't need you anymore. Rejected so clearly, Vince left quietly. Watching his lonely back, I turned back to Alex and Carl with a smile.
Alex, would you be happy if Carl became your dad?
Yes. I'd be happy. Alex nodded with a beaming smile. At that, Carl's eyes teared up.
Now, no crying if you want to be a dad.
Sure. Let me ask again. Please make me your husband and Alex's dad. I nodded with a smile at his words. After being rejected by us, Vince seemed to lose his soul. He even quit the part-time job he had been doing. Of course, Celine was furious, but she just let it slide. Finally fed up with Vince, she left and disappeared into the night. Vince was apparently taken back to his parents' house. It seems he really did love me, after all. I heard about Vince from my former in-laws. When they asked if I could possibly reconcile with Vince, I replied promptly,
I already have someone who cherishes both Alex and me.
Hearing that, they quickly gave up.
Hey, Alex. Do you want to see your former dad's parents?
No. I don't want to see them for a while. My former in-laws, who had neglected Alex due to frequent babysitting, apologized after learning the situation. However, Alex seemed to want to keep his distance. With Vince also at their house, we decided to become estranged. We no longer need them in our lives.
Carl is coming over next Saturday.
Really? I have so much I want to talk to Dad about. I stroked Alex's head as he said that with a smile. After that, we started dating. Then, when Carl returned from the subsidiary to the head office, we decided to move out of my parents' house. We planned to live together in a new home, the three of us. Please marry me.
Yes, I'd be happy to.
Soon after Carl's proposal, we got married. My parents and Dina blessed us. May you be happy this time? And Alex expressed his joy. I'm happy Carl is becoming my dad. I'm sure Carl will definitely make you happy. Dina had seen Carl's love for me and his heartbreak. That's why she encouraged him when I divorced Vince. I know both Kaylee's and Carl's good points. That's why I want you two to be happy. Dina had always helped and supported me. For her sake, I must be as happy as possible.
So, let's go out for a celebration drink next time. Sorry, I can't do that.
Huh? Dina looked bewildered as I smiled and gently rubbed my belly. Realizing what it meant, she beamed. Could it be?
I'm expecting our second child. So, I can't join you for drinks. Wow. I'm as happy as if it's my own.
She genuinely seemed thrilled. Her laughter made me smile too.
Alex is excited too, saying, I'm going to be a big bro. Wow, that's so like Alex. He'll definitely be a kind big brother.
When I told him about having a little sibling, he was overjoyed. Carl was the same, lifting me up in excitement until, don't strain Mom's body. Alex scolded him.
So, Dina, I want you to help us choose a name. Really? I'll think hard about it.
Dina instantly started pondering, looking thoughtful. Watching her, I smiled. Now, our family, Alex, Carl, the baby in my belly, and I, will build a home filled with laughter. I pledged that in my heart.
Huh? Cold? I don't care. Reflect on it overnight, in there! Through the door separating us, my mother-in-law Elizabeth yelled at me and locked me in the bathroom. Then simply walked away. Outside was freezing cold, The leftover bathwater was too cold for any comfort. Shivering and in tears, I reached out to my husband for help, only to hear, "It's your own fault for always complaining! You brought this on yourself! I'm going to sleep. You're not thrown outside, are you? You always overreact." His words didn't feel like they could come from someone I shared a blood relation with. Little did I know that this would lead to what happened the next morning. My name is Kate, a 33-year-old office worker. I met my husband John through a friend and married him a year ago after 2 years of dating. He was a man of few words, but intelligent, which drew me to him, but I'm already regretting this marriage. Of course, there's a reason for that. His family home is far away, and frankly, I somewhat dread visiting it. My family home is from Grandpa's time, a bit old-fashioned. These were the words my husband said to me when we were going back to his hometown to greet his parents-in-law. His grandparents had passed away a few years ago, and now it's just the parents-in-law living there. Well, even if it's old, it's still inhabited. Though maybe it's like a historic home. These days, that kind of thing is in vogue, so I was a little excited as we headed to my husband's family home. This place? I was so surprised by the building in front of me that I had to ask my husband if we were at the right place. Can people really live here? It's more than just a little old. In fact, to put it another way, albeit a bit rudely, it looked like it might fall apart at any moment. Mysterious plants were climbing the exterior walls, which my husband explained were there for shade. Some of the second-floor windows were broken and had been patched up with cardboard from the inside. My family home isn't a mansion, but it wasn't like this, not even my grandparents' house. The house next to my husband's family home had a well-maintained garden, and I couldn't help but compare. Without paying any mind to my overwhelmed state, my husband walked up to the entrance and, without ringing the doorbell, energetically opened the door. "Hey, we're here!" Then the parents-in-law appeared from the back of the house. "You must be tired from the long journey. Come in." I felt a bit relieved seeing their smiling faces. Every step we took inside, the floorboards creaked. The house was old inside, too, but we managed to finish our greetings and then headed back home. What an incredible house. Although I was shocked, it didn't make me reconsider my marriage to my husband. We wouldn't be visiting often, so I decided to brace myself and do my best whenever we did. Getting married often reveals unseen sides of your partner, and I learned that my husband really treasures his belongings. "Want to buy a new shirt? Look, this one's neck is all stretched out." When I pointed out his stretched out shirt, he proudly countered, No, it's still good to wear. This kind of wear adds character, like distressed jeans." One could say it's good to value things, but it bothered me when he would comment on my belongings too. I've been using my mobile phone for 3 years now. The battery's not great, and I'm thinking of getting a new one. While I was excitedly browsing catalogs, he said, "Why? It still works, right? Isn't it better to wait until it breaks? It's coming out of our household budget, and mobile phones aren't cheap." My husband complained to me, "It's too late if it breaks." But he did have a point. Mobile phones are not cheap. And after his comment, I felt hesitant to buy a new one when my husband had been using his phone for 5 years. Though I had my disagreements, our newlywed life continued peacefully. My husband John isn't picky about food and always finishes everything I cook, saying it's delicious. It was gratifying to cook for him. "Let's go to my parents' house for Thanksgiving. It's been a while, and Mom keeps nagging me to visit." I braced myself at my husband's words, but I was determined. There, I made a new discovery at my husband's family home. "You both came! It's good to see you!" The house, which I hadn't seen for months, was as usual, with its exterior vines creepily flourishing due to the summer sun. While making small talk, my father-in-law, Daniel, asked us to help weed the garden. Despite my reluctance due to the strong sunshine, I couldn't refuse and went outside. Standing there, I was sweating so much I felt like collapsing. Suddenly, I felt a gaze and saw the neighbors standing in their garden, staring at us. I said hello, but when they noticed my parents-in-law, they made a puzzled face and went inside. Elizabeth then said, "Don't bother greeting people like that, Kate. That person's not right in the head. I was startled by her loud voice. After about an hour, we finished, and the garden, previously overrun with weeds, was completely clean. You must be sweaty. Go ahead and take a bath. That's when I realized I'd never seen the bathroom in my husband's family home. I followed my husband, who had picked up a change of clothes, into what I thought was a storage shed in the garden. I quietly asked John, "What's Daniel doing with a change of clothes in there?" "It's a bath," he replied nonchalantly. "Our house has an outdoor bathroom." I was visibly shaken by his words. "Huh, a bath? I thought it was a storage shed." Later, I learned that my husband's family home originally didn't have a bathroom. They used to use a relative's nearby, but when the relative moved, they decided to add one. However, there was no space inside, so they installed it in the garden over 30 years ago. The bathhouse's walls had deteriorated due to weather exposure. I was in shock, and didn't want to enter. But I needed to wash off the sweat. I wanted to wash off my sweaty body right away. I had brought a change of clothes since Elizabeth had insisted we stay over before we came. I'll endure it. I need to wash. After debating with myself, I decided to take a bath. Surprisingly, it was clean and looked like a typical bath. Relieved, I soon realized something, and called John back. "Wait, John, where's the lock?" He casually replied, "A lock? There isn't one. It's inside our property, so it's fine." I exclaimed, "No lock here either?" There was a reason for my shock. The toilet in my husband's family home also doesn't have a lock. It was unlikely that someone would enter. But it was still unsettling in someone else's home. The most shocking was their habit of not locking the front door. It seemed there was no custom of locking anything, and people with business at the house would just open the door and call out, "Elizabeth, the world's dangerous these days." I tried to encourage locking up, but she dismissed it, saying, "This is the countryside. Besides, there's no one around here wicked enough to steal." That left me uneasy. In the end, I quickly took my bath, anxious and eager to get out. Being a worrier, I slept clutching my valuables. From now on, I decided to definitely refuse to stay overnight when visiting my husband's family. I had made up my mind. As the seasons changed from summer to autumn and winter, and the end of the year approached, I began to experience more stomach aches. We hadn't planned to visit my husband's family for the year-end holidays, but a few days ago, he suddenly said, "Looks like Uncle and cousins are coming over for New Year's Eve. Mom is insisting that we come. Kate, you haven't met them yet, right? Think of it as just showing your face, please." He suddenly said something like that. We hadn't had a wedding ceremony, just a dinner with both families. So I hadn't met my husband's relatives yet. It seemed Elizabeth already knew we were coming, and I was really annoyed at my husband's selfish decision. "Hey, don't decide on your own. We agreed to visit my family this year, remember? My mom is looking forward to it." My husband got a little angry at my words. "What can I do about it? Isn't it normal to visit the husband's family? Sometimes you're a bit selfish." He said that. What? Selfish? That doesn't make sense. I was furious. The atmosphere between us remained tense until we left to visit his family. I began to think maybe we were too different in values, especially with his tendency to hold on to things too long. My stomach aches persisted. It was during our trip to his family's house for the year-end. Unable to stand the awkward silence, he said, "Hey, I asked Dad to put locks on the doors. I'm sorry." Seeing his apologetic face, "It's okay. Thanks for the lock thing," I quietly replied. Little did I know what would happen a few hours later. When we arrived at his family's home, the relatives had already gathered. The small house felt suffocating with so many people, but everyone was really nice. When they learned about my university and workplace, an uncle said, "That's impressive. John, you married a wonderful person." I smiled and thanked him for his polite remark. My husband and his family seemed displeased, hearing our conversation. I felt a chill down my spine, but didn't think much of it. After the uncles left, leaving just us and the parents-in-law, the room temperature seemed to drop. "It's cold. Let's take turns in the bath and then go to bed," I glanced at Elizabeth, who seemed her usual self. Daniel usually bathes first, so while waiting inside, Elizabeth said, "By the way, Kate, isn't it a bit self-centered to ask for locks? Look, we put one on for you." I was surprised when Elizabeth told me to go to the bathroom. I was shocked to see the lock on the toilet was on the outside. Just a simple hook. What is this? I forced a smile. "Let us know when you want it locked," and she said with a malicious grin. I thought, what a spiteful person. This is ridiculous. It's not a prison, so don't mess around. As the daughter-in-law, I was last for the bath, and stepping outside, the extreme cold made me shiver. It was an unusually snowy year for the region. The bathhouse door had the same type of lock as the toilet, again, on the outside. Frustrated, I entered the cold, drafty cabin. Just awful. Then, as soon as I entered, I heard someone lock the door from the outside. "Who's there? John?" Trembling from the cold and fear, I asked the person outside. "John said he was going to bed. I can't wait for your bath to be over. And I'm going to sleep too. Good night then." Elizabeth laughed mockingly and started to leave. Of course, the door was closed and wouldn't open. If Elizabeth left, I wouldn't be able to get out of here. "Elizabeth, wait, please! Open the door! I'll be trapped here!" I banged on the door with my numb hand. "You're so noisy! Don't shout like that! It was you who wanted the door locked. Plus, you mocked me earlier, didn't you?" "What? What is she talking about? Is she out of her mind? What are you talking about? Just open the door, please!" I felt like I was going to explode with anger. "Just because you went to a slightly better college than John, you brag about it. You must be looking down on me in your heart for not having a college degree, right?" It was the first time I knew that Elizabeth hadn't gone to college. I only mentioned my college and workplace because she asked. I wish she'd consider how it feels to be subjected to her irrational, educational inferiority complex. "Elizabeth, please, open the door! I'm freezing to death!" As I said this, with a shivering body, cold. I don't care. Reflect on it overnight. There." With those words, Elizabeth hurried back to the house and showed no signs of returning. Tears of frustration rolled down my cheeks. Fortunately, I had my mobile phone with me and shakily called my husband. "Please answer the phone." "Yes?" After a few rings, my husband answered the phone in an irritable voice. "John, help! Elizabeth locked me in the bathroom. Please, come quickly." While I felt relieved, my husband said, "It's your fault for always complaining. You reap what you sow. I'm sleepy and going to bed. You're not thrown outside, so stop overreacting." And he abruptly hung up. I couldn't believe it. At the same time, my mobile phone's battery died. The reception was bad at my husband's family home, and the battery drained quickly, partly because I forgot to charge it last night. I felt pathetic. Despite my efforts to open the door by hitting it with my body, it didn't budge. Desperately, I continued to pound on the door. "Open up! This isn't funny! Please, open the door!" Then, from the other side of the door, "Are you okay?" My mobile phone rang the next morning. It was a call from my husband. "Yes, what do you want?" I answered coldly. Opposite to me, my husband sounded terribly panicked on the phone. "Hey, Kate, where are you? I thought for sure you were—" He yelled incoherently. His panic was understandable. There were ambulances and police cars parked at his family's home. Seeing this, I too became curious about what had happened. "Just come quickly!" He shouted at me and hung up one-sidedly. As I headed to his family home, thinking how his inability to listen to others ran in the family. My husband was shocked when I appeared just a few minutes after the call. "Where have you been until now? It's her! She's the one who locked Mom in!" While wondering what he was talking about, I saw my parents-in-law glaring at me. Elizabeth was wrapped in a blanket, shivering, perhaps from the cold. "What's this situation? And what happened to this lady?" One of the police officers approached me and asked, "Your family claims you locked her in. Is that true?" Apparently, Elizabeth had been locked in the bathroom all night by someone. This morning, Daniel, unaware of anything, found Elizabeth, cold, and called an ambulance in a panic. The police were also called, suspecting foul play, and the real culprit was framing me. No, that's not true. I was locked outside of the bathhouse by that person yesterday. Plus, doing something as inhumane as locking someone in is not something I would do. I said this, pointing at Elizabeth. Then, as if he had reached his limit, my husband broke down crying. It's not like that! I thought it was Kate, and I just wanted to teach her a lesson. Last night, seeing the bathroom light on, my husband assumed I had gotten out of the bathhouse on my own. He locked the door from outside as a punishment, but it was Elizabeth inside. Unaware, he quickly returned to bed and fell asleep. Elizabeth must have panicked after being locked in. But Daniel and my husband are such heavy sleepers. Once asleep, they hardly wake up. Waking up and mistakenly thinking I had locked her in, Daniel, along with the police, was panicking. He didn't realize he was the real culprit. Hearing the story, my parents-in-law, fearing their son's arrest, continued to blame me. Then, from behind me, "This young lady was at our house all night. That mean woman locked her outside and she was crying. Poor thing." An elderly couple spoke up. They had helped me yesterday. They asked me if I was okay, and then the door quietly opened. The elderly man looked at me with concern and said, "Come to our house. It's cold here. Let's make some warm drinks," inviting me to their home next to my husband's family home. I couldn't stop my tears of gratitude. Once I calmed down and told them what my husband's family had done, the couple was outraged and said, "We were worried about you since we saw you in the summer. This family is crazy. You should leave him." I had already decided to do so. I could have lost my life in this incident. Continuing as his wife was impossible. I charged my mobile phone at their house. After hearing from the elderly couple, the police seemed to understand the situation and said, "Please tell us your side," looking coldly at my husband's family. "What? You mean you guys trespassed on our property, right? I'll sue you. Be ready." Daniel was so bitter, even towards the elderly couple, opposite to the raging parents-in-law. "Is that so? Then we will also sue. You have been entering our garden when we are not around and stealing our roses every year. It's all on the security cameras. You have trampled our flower beds, and we have had enough." Hearing the man's words, my parents-in-law immediately quieted down. "Kate, I didn't mean for this to happen. I'm sorry. Please." Elizabeth pleaded tearfully, but of course, I couldn't forgive her. "Elizabeth, you once said that there are no dirty thieves around here, yet I was almost killed because of your ridiculous educational complex. I will never come here again. And as for your stupid son, I'm returning him right now." I said this to my husband's family. My husband was crying and apologizing, but there was no way I could forgive him. I returned to my parents' house, and against my stubborn husband's refusal to divorce, I said, "I'll settle this incident on the condition of divorce. If you don't understand, consult a lawyer." Reluctantly, the police agreed to the divorce. I wanted to divorce him as soon as possible. I haven't seen my ex-husband since. Years later, surrounded by my new husband and adorable daughter, I live a peaceful life. Despite everything, I wonder if those hardships led to my current happiness. As we watch the morning news, I spit out my coffee in surprise. Please look at the footage of the record-breaking hurricane. This house has been completely destroyed, roof and all. More than the announcer broadcasting live, I was drawn to the building and the people in the background. It was unmistakably my ex-husband's family home, with an older-looking ex-parents-in-law desperately holding onto the walls. The elderly couple next door might have moved out. Their house was demolished and turned into an empty lot. Worried about my reaction, my current husband and daughter asked if I was okay, and I just laughed. It's nothing.
My name is Isabella, and I'm a 28-year-old working mother. My husband Richard is a company employee, 2 years my senior, and we're about to celebrate our first anniversary. We met at a party I was invited by a colleague. Amidst many assertive people, Richard stood out as calm and kind, and despite being older, he had this adorable quality. The way he talked was different from other men who seemed rather sleazy, which put me off. In contrast, Richard would say things like, "My family is really close," or "That embroidery on your dress is cute. My mom loves stuff like this." His conversations were heartwarming, and he was the easiest person to open up to. At that party, I only exchanged contact details with Richard, and soon after, we started seeing each other and naturally progressed to dating. Before marriage, Richard lived with his parents. I've been living alone since I went to college, away from my parents. Living at home, Richard didn't have to pay rent, so despite being around the same age, his disposable income was much higher than mine. Richard loves to travel with his family and friends. We traveled together sometimes, but I couldn't afford it as much, so it was only on rare occasions. After marrying, we started living together in an apartment. It was Richard's first time living away from his parents. He seemed excited and happy about our new life, so I didn't sense any problems until he said, "This weekend, I'm inviting Mom and Dad over. Actually, from now on, they'll come over every weekend." What? Richard began inviting his parents over every weekend. Their house was just a short drive away. Occasional visits would have been fine, but frequent visits were a bit much. I thought they visited just recently. I asked casually, trying not to upset him. "Yeah, isn't it great? Their family after all." He didn't get the hint at all. Every weekend, I felt utterly helpless, dreading their visits. The issue with my in-laws coming over was the repetitive talk. "Richard is such a remarkable son. The pride of the family, ha 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 ha." Hearing the same conversation every time was one of the challenges. My in-laws often come over on Friday nights and stay until late on Sundays, spending all their time chatting in the living room. I can't just leave, so I end up having to be part of these interactions. Since they are guests, I'm the one who has to host. On my precious days off, I'm expected to cook lavish meals, clean the house, and even take care of their personal needs, leaving me exhausted. It would be nice if my husband and in-laws appreciated my efforts, but instead they complain about my cooking. "Isabella, your cooking is somehow lacking. The drinks don't go down well with this. Richard, are you eating properly? You look thinner." "It's okay, Mom, Dad. I often eat out during the week." All three of them criticize my cooking. I had noticed before we got married that Richard's family tends to have heavily seasoned food. During our dating period, when I cooked for him, I was surprised to see him dousing steaks and scrambled eggs with loads of sauce. I started worrying if my cooking was too bland, but I realized it was just Richard's taste, as he did the same even in restaurants. Still, it's frustrating to hear from my in-laws, "Isabella, you need to cook properly. Didn't you taste it? Is this how it's supposed to be? A wife who can't cook is no good. You need to improve, or it might lead to divorce." It's irritating to be told that my food isn't delicious. Your seasoning is too strong, or maybe your taste buds are off. I can't just say, "I'll be more careful next time." All I can say is, so I started making the food saltier and providing extra sauces when they visit, which I don't normally do. I can't risk my husband developing high blood pressure. "Oh, today's meal is a bit better, I guess." It has improved a bit, just a bit. Their appraisal slightly improved. But when I tasted it, it was quite salty, and I thought to myself, what a family of tasteless eaters. Well, if they are satisfied with that, I suppose it's okay for now. However, Things got even worse. One weekday, when I returned home tired from work, I found my mother-in-law, Emma, there. "I'm here to teach you how to cook." It was past 9 p.m. "I have to get up early tomorrow," I thought, but my silent plea was ignored as Emma's cooking lesson began. Her cooking was, as I expected, laden with seasonings to an unhealthy extent. The soup was loaded with condiments, and the main dish was fatty meat with extremely heavy seasoning. "It whets your appetite, doesn't it?" Emma seemed delighted. Richard dug in like a boy, exclaiming, "This is it." The difference in our food values was terrifying, and I reluctantly tasted a bit of the meal. After that, Emma began visiting our home frequently. On weekends, my father-in-law, Joseph, would also stay over. It was almost like living together. It was exhausting. I reached my limit trying to accommodate my in-laws and desperately wanted to lose 2 days off a week without seeing them. So I subtly suggested to my husband, "How about we go somewhere to relax?" He loves traveling, and I thought he would take it as a hint for a trip. As expected, he said, "Great idea, let's plan a trip." He began planning the trip. Since moving in together, we had been in an almost co-living situation with his parents, but this would be our first trip alone since our honeymoon. Richard hadn't been traveling with his friends either. I hoped he was saving for our future. The trip he planned was a weekend getaway for 2 nights and 3 days. The destination wasn't far, so we could relax without taking leave. "Thank you," I said, grateful to my husband for planning it. "Yeah, leave the trip planning to me," he said proudly. In hindsight, that was a mistake. On the day of the trip, while waiting for the bus to our destination, Richard was looking around restlessly. "What's wrong?" I asked, but I realized the reason before he could answer. "Oh, good, we made it in time." "Hey, Richard, sorry to keep you waiting." To my surprise, my in-laws had shown up. I looked at my husband apprehensively. "Come on, both of you, we're almost late for departure. That was close." "That was close? No, this is not what was planned. I want my enjoyment back." "What do you mean?" "When I mentioned the trip, Mom and Dad thought it would be more fun if we all went together," my husband said with a smile. I wish he had at least consulted me, or better yet, stopped discussing everything with his parents. He's already 30, for goodness sake. "Come on, let's get on the bus." "Isabella, don't just stand there daydreaming." "Okay." I wished for my 3-day holiday back. Throughout the trip, the enthusiasm of my husband and in-laws was overwhelming. "Let's have lunch at that restaurant." "Let's go to that place for drinks tonight." All the places I wanted to visit were ignored. Richard kept catering to his parents, paying no attention to my preferences. The worst part was, "Wow, what a great room, Richard." It was a 4-person room. I had been looking forward to staying in a suite, but it was a different room. Unable to sleep due to their snoring, it was an utterly exhausting trip. Back at work after the trip, I let out a big sigh, and my colleague next to me looked at me in surprise. "Hey, what's wrong? You've got serious dark circles." "Really?" I checked in a hand mirror and saw severe dark circles, not just blue but almost like red blemishes. I hadn't noticed them in my rush to leave the house. Lately, I've been so tired that I haven't spent much time on makeup. I was shocked. Then my colleague whispered in my ear, "This is hard to say, but Isabella, your hair..." She pointed to a spot on my head. "What?" Afraid of what I might find, we went to the restroom together. Using the restroom mirror and my hand mirror, I checked the spot she pointed out and found a bald patch, the size of a coin. No way. I felt all my strength leave my body. A friend of mine had the same issue. Are you stressed? Doesn't your husband notice? My colleague helped arrange my hair to cover the bald spot, but I was truly shocked and didn't know what to do. Since it wasn't very busy that day, I left work early due to feeling unwell and stopped by the dermatologist before going home. I received medication, but it wasn't something that would heal quickly. The doctor said the cause wasn't clear-cut. However, I had already made up my mind. When my husband Richard came home, I brought up the subject. About the next trip we're planning. Richard seemed really excited about the last trip and was already planning the next one. He says it's just the two of us, but I'm sure his parents will end up coming again. So I tried a different approach. Can we take my parents along? If I said I didn't want to go, the trip would be cancelled, and his parents would probably end up staying at our house again. If I said I wanted to go out, his parents would join us. Yet, Richard hardly spends any time with my parents. He's only met them at the marriage introduction and the wedding. I thought this would be a good opportunity for him to understand how difficult it is to spend time with in-laws. But his next words left me speechless. No, I don't want to. It's tiring and I need to be considerate. What? He makes me put up with his parents all the time and now he says it's tiring? I was completely infuriated. Later, my husband, I, and his parents, as expected, went on another trip. What place is this, I wonder? Wasn't it expensive, Richard? Are you sure it's okay? His parents seemed excited about the new destination, which was a bit further away than usual. Well, this time Isabella planned it, so I'm not too sure. Richard replied to Joseph. Yes, I planned this trip. The accommodations, the restaurants, everything was booked by me. Isabella, it's important to have fun, but don't spend too much, okay? Yeah, a wife needs to be frugal. Upon learning that I arranged everything, his parents started implying that I was careless with money. It's okay, I got a good deal through an acquaintance. Oh, I hope it's not too old or anything. And not a place with bland food. That would ruin the trip. I'm a bit worried about Isabella's choices. Ignoring their unhelpful comments, I led the way to our accommodation. It was getting dark, perfect timing for dinner. We planned to have our meal at the hotel. Upon arriving, Richard and his parents were astonished. Is this really the place? It was a splendid upscale hotel. Yes, let's go in. I entered the lobby nonchalantly and completed the check-in. The room had a beautiful view of the sea, which would be even more apparent in the morning. I had arranged for the meals to be brought to our room. They were quite lavish courses. As the meal began, my in-laws were initially speechless. Once the hotel staff who had arranged and explained the dishes left, they started reacting in the complete opposite way. Places like this look good, but that's about it. It's expensive, but the taste might be mediocre. They began eating, complaining all the while, seemingly unable to graciously accept that I had arranged a stay at such a nice hotel. Then the comments started. Oh, this is bland. Is there any seasoning? See, it's all just for show. Maybe Isabella's arrangement wasn't such a good idea. All three, my in-laws and Richard, began complaining about the food. I found it delicious, but what could I do with three people whose taste was off? Sitting near the room's entrance, I discreetly summoned the hotel staff without them noticing. I let the staff listen to their gripes and demands for a while. This lack of taste in the food reminds me of Isabella's cooking. Did we come all this way just to eat Isabella's cooking? I was hoping for something delicious on this trip. They effortlessly mixed complaints about the hotel and me, freely voicing their opinions without any prompt from me. This hotel looks old. It must be cheap because it's big. Is this how our son's wife treats us? Choosing a cheap place for us to stay? Don't worry, Dad, Mom. Next time I'll handle the arrangements. They kept eating and complaining. Then, "Excuse me," a voice from outside the door said. Emma, thinking it was the next course being served, cheerfully replied, "Yes, but it wasn't about the food. I understand there have been some dissatisfaction with our hotel." The man who appeared wasn't carrying any dishes. It was a man not holding anything. "Oh," Richard uttered, freezing up. The man continued, "I also heard there were complaints about my daughter." "Yes, the man who appeared was my father." "Oh, Emma looked confused and turned to Joseph. "Well, what a coincidence to meet here! Ha ha ha!" Joseph laughed nervously, but my father's expression remained stern. "If there's anything you're unsatisfied with, we can remake it or change to a different menu. May I ask what it would be?" My father calmly questioned them. The three, having pretty much finished their meals, seemed unable to respond. "No, nothing in particular," Richard replied. "Is that so? Earlier, my daughter asked me to listen to your requests, as you are important guests. So I was waiting outside. I apologize if our hotel's cuisine, which is relatively lightly seasoned, did not meet your preferences." When the three realized that my father had heard everything, their expressions changed to shock. "It's a joke. The food was actually very delicious. Just kidding around, you know. Ha ha ha." Seeing Richard's forced laughter, my father said, "There's no need to strain yourself." Richard's face froze at this. I had called my father to discuss the stress caused by my in-laws, leading to my alopecia, and the lack of support from Richard. It was the first time I consulted him about my husband. My mother passed away early, and I didn't want to worry my father too much. Hearing my story, my father was furious. "I'm coming over right now." He was determined to travel despite the distance from our house to his. I told him about Richard's travel plans and the likelihood of the in-laws joining, so we devised this plan together. My father is a retired manager of a prestigious hotel and still has influence there. As a child, I was often left at this hotel. Because of his late working hours and my kindergarten schedule, the hotel was my caretaker. I was doted on by the staff, helped with cleaning, learned cooking, and enjoyed delicious meals. So, my cooking skills are honed by this hotel. And I'm confident they are not as bad as my husband and in-laws complain. If this hotel doesn't suit you, please leave. If you are a burden to my daughter, I'll cut off ties," my father said sternly to Richard and my in-laws. "How can you say that? Tell a guest to leave?" My in-laws were furious, but another staff member came in and cleared their plates. They were stunned by this. "Please leave," my father urged them, and they reluctantly exited the hotel. "Is this a joke? We'll get our money back, right?" They complained, but the money won't be refunded, as I was the one who paid. Watching my in-laws leave, the hotel employees looked at them with disdain. They must have been really uncomfortable. The in-laws' complaints quickly ceased. For once, the usual 3-on-1 criticism against me was reversed, and I felt a sense of relief. After that incident, my husband, not wanting to face me, went back to his parents' house. I compiled all the mistreatment I had endured and consulted a lawyer. After getting an estimate for alimony, I sent the documents to my husband by mail. Startled, he hurried back home, pleading with a near tearful face, "Divorce and alimony? That's too harsh." But when I asked, "Do you have a solution then?" he stuttered, unable to answer. It was clear he would never prioritize me over his parents. "If you want to fight this thoroughly, I can call my lawyer," I warned. He quickly agreed to the divorce. My ex-husband returned to his parents' house, but it turned out he didn't have much money. I had thought his frequent travels before marriage meant he was well off, maybe saving money by living at home, but he was just a spendthrift. Living at home, he managed even if he spent his whole salary. After marriage, when we started sharing rent, his inability to afford travels became apparent. Now, with the alimony on top, travel seems out of reach for a while. Neither my ex-husband nor his parents are likely to travel anytime soon. The hotel my father chased them from is a very famous one, well known for its cuisine, and often featured in the media, which my ex-in-laws were unaware of. The inn of my ex-daughter-in-law's father is terrible. The food is awful. And so on, they kept saying at family gatherings, apparently embarrassing themselves. "Isn't that the wonderful hotel? Oh, your family, right? Tasteless, aren't they? How's your blood pressure? Better be careful," they were told. I heard this from a close relative. Though I divorced in my 20s, my alopecia has healed, and I'm living happily and healthily. I cook and eat what I like, feeling much better physically. This year taught me that forcing myself to adapt is harmful. While it's natural not to share all values, I've learned to avoid marrying someone imposing and overbearing again.
My life might have been tougher than the average person's. I didn't have a dad. It was just my single mom who raised me all by herself. We were estranged from our relatives, so mom was all alone in her efforts, and she managed to send me to college. But years of hardship took their toll, and she passed away due to illness around the same time I graduated. After that, I had no family left, but I landed a job at a regular company and met my wonderful husband, Tony. Tony, an executive at a client company, was a bit older than me. Having grown up without a dad, Tony was a reassuring and reliable figure for me. One day, I forgot some important documents at the client's office. Realizing this, I decided to rush back there without telling my boss, intending to retrieve them. But I didn't have a pass to enter the client's building. My boss usually handled such matters, and of course, I couldn't ask him. Standing clueless in front of the client's office, an employee I had met earlier came running out with the documents. That was how I met Tony. Knowing my situation, Tony handed me the documents and said with an innocent smile, "Let's keep this our little secret." I fell for that smile and aggressively pursued him. It didn't take long for us to get married, and I found happiness. We weren't blessed with children, but every day was joyful. Tony, who always made me laugh, had rescued me from a lifetime of loneliness. Just as I vowed to spend my life by Tony's side, we discovered he had cancer, already at stage 4. The doctor broke the news to us. I was devastated. Tony deeply regretted leaving me alone in the end. But just before our 10th wedding anniversary, Tony passed away. Feeling lonely again, I was contemplating my solitude when suddenly, father-in-law George proposed, "How about living together?" George was the only person who genuinely rejoiced and celebrated our marriage. Initially, when Tony and I decided to marry, I had no family, so I was met with skepticism from Tony's circles and relatives. Some relatives even opposed our marriage. However, George never cared about me having no family, and after the marriage, treated me like his real family. Tony's mother, Marie, had passed away when he was young, so George had been living for many years with his real sister, Lily, Maybe that's why George was so handy and could manage all household tasks. He was also a great cook, often visiting our home to treat us with delicious meals. Lily, who lived with George, was single and didn't have a steady job. She used to earn quite a bit from door-to-door sales, but since that company went bankrupt, she struggled to find stable employment and was doing odd jobs. Most of the living expenses were covered by George's income, but a few years ago, George's legs grew weak. He quit his job, and they were barely getting by on his small earnings and pension. Knowing that George, who handled household chores, wasn't in the best health, I had been helping out at his place from time to time, even when Tony was alive. George would always apologize with a regretful look, saying, "I'm sorry, I've become a burden because of my condition." I'd reply, "Don't worry about it. I'm good at housework, and I'm happy to see you well." Not knowing what it's like to have a dad, I was genuinely happy to take care of George. Tony, knowing I considered George like a real dad, was always happy to send me off to help. However, Lily didn't feel the same way. Whenever I went to help, she would meet me at the door and say, "So, you're here to butter up again. You're an outsider, you know. No matter what you do, you won't get any inheritance." With a spiteful look. I would always deny it, saying, "No, that's not my intention." But Lily would repeat the same line every time I visited. Despite her continuous sarcasm towards me, Lily never attempted to do any housework. Ideally, Lily, who had been living there all along, should have been the one doing the chores, but she would always go out and not return until late at night. Even when she was home and saw me helping, she would just hurl insults at me and then return to her room, seemingly satisfied. George noticed this behavior and warned Lily, but it had no effect. He then apologized to me again, saying, "I'm sorry." Because of this, even though I didn't mind taking care of George, living together would mean facing Lily every day. I asked for some time to think about George's offer. After all, living alone after Tony's passing was indeed unsettling. Having someone reliable around is completely different. Especially since the offer came from George, who was like a dad to me. Despite Lily's harassment, I concluded that I could endure it to live a better life. I strongly preferred returning to a home with George over going back to an empty house. Later, I moved in with George, bringing only a few belongings. I was familiar with George's house, knowing where everything was, except for the inside of Lily's room. Whenever I passed by, I could smell cigarette smoke, but her door was always closed. When I offered to clean her room occasionally, she accused me of being a thief. "No way! Don't enter my room without permission. You might steal something." I protested. "I would never do such a thing." "You can't be sure. After all, you have no family to trouble, right?" Every time Lily spoke to me, she would use words like outsider and remind me of having no family. Knowing these were the words that hurt me the most, she knew I couldn't retort and deliberately used them. Once her door was half open and I could see inside, confirming Lily wasn't there, I peeked in to find cigarette butts, alcohol bottles, and trash scattered on the floor. I hesitated for a moment, but knowing Lily would accuse me again, I quietly closed the door. Since Lily was mostly out during the day, I could spend the day in peace by avoiding her in the mornings and evenings, enduring the harsh treatment. This life continued for several months. Lily's harassment persisted, but during this time, George's health deteriorated day by day. Recently, walking became difficult for him, leading to more bedridden days. His health worsened, catching colds more frequently. Despite hospital visits, his condition did not improve, and a year into living together, he couldn't get out of bed anymore. I suggested hospitalization, but George stubbornly refused. Seeing this, Lily loudly accused me in front of George. "Ever since you came to this house, George's health has been declining. Are you putting something in his food, I wonder?" George looked at his sister, but no longer had the energy to admonish her. Then, turning to me, he wore the same apologetic expression as before. Perhaps he was worried that if he were hospitalized, Lily would torment me even more. I continued to care for George while trying to ignore Lily's constant bad-mouthing. Lily didn't care for her own brother at all. She only entered George's room to hurl insults at me. But as George's care was demanding, I barely reacted to her. Maybe because I didn't respond to her verbal abuse, she started throwing things at me when she was drunk. "Don't act all high and mighty cleaning our house. This is mine, and George's home. Just stick to cooking or something," she yelled, splashing her drink on me. My head was drenched in alcohol, and some even spilled onto George's bed. "Stop it, please. It's getting on George," I begged, trying to stop her. But Lily, drunk, wouldn't listen. "Don't order me around, you plague! You're the one weakening George!" Her actions filled the room with a smell of alcohol. When Lily got like this, there was no stopping her until she was satisfied. Sometimes, she would even hurl abusive words at George. "George, maybe it's time for you to find peace. If this continues, my living expenses will turn into your medical bills. This woman will be happy to be rid of her caregiving duties." She mercilessly spoke such cruel words to her own brother. George just looked at her with tearful eyes. All I could do was protect George and wait for the violence to end. Lily's drunken rampages were always predictable. She spent her days outside, frequently visiting a nearby lottery ticket vendor. One time, she returned home in a very good mood, with her arms full of paper bags stuffed with a lot of sweets, and the smell of cigarette smoke was strongly emanating from her clothes. I once asked her, "Where have you been?" She replied, "None of your business! Even if I win the lottery, I won't give you a dime," and snickered, and she walked into her room. She must have been in a good mood to accidentally reveal her lottery habit. That was when I first learned Lily spent her days at the lottery ticket vendor. I was curious how she managed to fund her lottery habit, but I was too frightened by her outbursts to ask. Whenever the lottery didn't pay off, Lily would inevitably drink and take her frustration out on me. She would come home, pull out alcohol from the fridge, and demand, "Hey, make dinner!" Since she often returned late at night, I would prepare meals and run her bath. Neglecting these tasks would result in her throwing things and screaming, so I never had a moment's peace. Despite this, I dedicated myself to caring for George 24/7, actively engaging in his rehabilitation. However, George grew increasingly frail and struggled even to breathe. After several months of my devoted care, George passed away. Though he was too weak to speak, he mustered the strength to thank me. "You've been a great help. Thank you." Hearing these final words from George made all my hardships seem worth it. He had supported my marriage to his son, and after Tony's death, he offered to live with me, an outsider. George was my greatest benefactor. With his passing, I found myself alone again. But I couldn't afford to be sentimental, as Lily didn't lift a finger to help with the funeral arrangements, leaving everything to me. It was only after the funeral that I could truly reflect on my time with George. Because of his caring nature, distant relatives gathered to pay their respects. During the post-funeral meal, everyone reminisced about George. Even Lily listened quietly to the relatives' stories. "He always stood by us," one said. "Right? He was always there when we needed him," added another. George had always been a man of action, never expecting anything in return for his help. Hearing this, I felt happy, as if they were talking about me too. Then a relative broached the subject. "What about the inheritance? There should be land and real estate left." "Yeah, he inherited his wife's assets too, so it must be a considerable amount." Despite the funeral just ending, they started discussing the inheritance. Hearing this, Lily's eyes lit up. "Right! I'm the closest blood relative, so I'll protect George's inheritance. Besides, I've been taking care of him, so I have a right to inherit," she confidently declared. Watching Lily's eyes sparkle, I felt a deep sense of unease. But I couldn't avoid the inheritance discussion. It was a matter that didn't concern me. As the relatives were getting worked up over the inheritance, a man suddenly entered. Everyone looked at him, but judging by the relatives' faces, no one seemed to recognize him. Amid the strange atmosphere, the man handed out his business card and said, "I've been entrusted with the will." Lily, sensing an opportunity, approached the lawyer and said, "Really? Then let's open the will right here." Her eyes were shining again as she pulled the lawyer to a seat. The lawyer took out the will from his bag and began to read it in a calm manner. Lily's face turned red immediately. The relatives also became restless. The will stated that all of George's estate was entrusted to me, and nothing was left for his biological sister. I was as surprised as anyone. Even though I lived with George, I was still an outsider. That he entrusted his entire estate to me was unexpected. Hearing the lawyer's words, Lily lost her bright eyes, her face filling with anger and hatred. "How can he leave the inheritance to some unknown woman? This is unacceptable. Has George lost his mind?" Lily yelled in a voice that was almost like a roar. She continued, "After Marie passed away, it was me who lived with and struggled with George. What does this woman know about our lives? It's ridiculous to leave everything to her." She looked ready to pounce on me. Some relatives seemed to agree. "Yeah, she lived with him for a long time. She's his real sister. Maybe there's a mistake in this will. Probably moved in for the inheritance. Yeah, maybe she manipulated him into writing the will." The relatives, perhaps upset they weren't receiving anything, started to speculate wildly. Internally, I thought, they don't know the truth. But I knew any protest from me would play right into Lily's hands. As I remained silent and looked down, the relatives' mistrust in me seemed to grow. Just as they were about to discuss contesting the will, the previously silent lawyer spoke up. "Decide what to do with this will after you see this," he said, placing an envelope and a USB memory stick on the table. Lily, with a puzzled expression, opened the envelope, and a multitude of photos spilled out. They showed Lily in a rage, swinging around bottles of alcohol. She turned pale and clutched the photos tightly. As the relatives gathered and saw more photos, they found images of Lily throwing things at me and George, and her entering the lottery ticket vendor. There were also pictures of her withdrawing money from a bank ATM. The lawyer explained promptly, "These are photos of her withdrawing George's pension without permission." I realized then that she had been using George's pension for her lottery expenses. Lily was out almost every day. I had noticed her frequent visits to the lottery place, but I didn't know where the money was coming from. I received a fixed amount for household expenses, so I had no way to investigate. Seeing these photos, the relatives who had been suspicious of me now turned their doubtful eyes towards Lily. "What's the meaning of these photos? Did you withdraw money for the lottery without permission?" Lily, struggling for an explanation, said, "I did it because George said it was okay. I only got angry and threw things because that woman was being unreasonable. George knew about it and stayed quiet." Then the lawyer added, "We have more evidence to show," and opened a laptop, plugging in the USB drive. The same scene of Lily swinging alcohol appeared on the screen, but this time with audio. "George, when are you going to die? Once you do, I'll get your inheritance. You must be wishing for death, too." Incredibly, it was all recorded with video and audio. According to the lawyer, George, fearing for his and my life, had hired him before his death. He had secretly installed cameras and hired a detective to tail Lily, capturing her actions outside. He wanted to ensure that his estate wouldn't end with his sister after his death, so he asked for the will to be backed up with these photos and videos. I was astonished. George, who in his later years could hardly move and struggled to speak, had planned all this. I was astounded by George's resourcefulness to the very end. Lily seemed to have lost the energy to argue any further, looking down and clenching her teeth. With all this evidence presented, she must have realized that any excuses would not convince the relatives. She downed a bottle of alcohol in one go and slumped over the table. After witnessing the video, the relatives were clearly not inclined to let Lily inherit the estate. Thanks to the will and the plethora of evidence the lawyer presented, I was the one who inherited the estate. Initially, I thought of declining the substantial inheritance. Even though it was George's wish, we were still strangers after all. I feared I might end up misusing the fortune, perhaps even in gambling, like Lily. But the fact remained that George trusted me and treated me like family, even if it was for a short while. As a gesture of gratitude, I decided to use the inheritance to maintain George's grave for as long as I live. I had enough to live on from Tony's inheritance. I erected a tombstone for George and set up a grand altar, placing photographs of Tony and George and Marie there. As for Lily, she succumbed to a gambling addiction and alcoholism and was forcibly admitted to a hospital. She likely won't leave it for the rest of her life. While I did feel a pang of pity, I couldn't forgive the years of torment she put me through. Still, as George's biological sister, I thought it right to cover her hospital expenses. Now, alone again, my situation was different from before. I had something to protect. That alone made me feel not so solitary. From now on, I plan to live out my remaining days peacefully in the house I shared with George. Ah, the wrestling sister! Scott's innocent voice echoed through the room. This was Walter's wedding venue. Mary is petite and clearly doesn't wrestle. Did you play wrestling with her? I asked, and Scott shook his head. Because she was on top of Grandpa the other day! The venue erupted into whispers at his words. Walter, myself, and a word from the boss made Cody and Mary realize the gravity of the situation. My name is Ruby. I'm 53. Grew up in a regular house in the countryside. Fell in love with my husband Cody when I was 20. We had a smooth relationship and discovered I was pregnant a few years later. Cody was only 20 at the time. However, he proposed, and here we are. Shotgun marriages were still frowned upon, and we were young with little income. Life wasn't easy then. I earned more and essentially supported Cody, which became neighborhood gossip. But we persevered despite the cold stares. Cody worked hard and climbed the ladder. We have 2 sons, Walter and Taylor. Taylor, like us, had a shotgun marriage 5 years ago. Though society isn't as harsh now, we understand the challenges. I work part-time and help out by watching Scott when I can. Amelia, a student then, has been Taylor's girlfriend for a while and often visited our home. She's a good girl, and I have no worries about Taylor's future. Meanwhile, Walter never seemed interested in romance. No rumors ever. Earlier this year, Cody, concerned, wanted to introduce Walter to a colleague's daughter. Walter was reluctant, but I was worried about him staying alone, so we agreed to meet her. One weekend, Cody left early to pick her up. I was preparing lunch, waiting. It was special for her to come to our house on the first meeting. A kind gesture. The doorbell rang just past noon. Walter, who had come down to the first floor, sighed slightly. "Walter, don't sigh," I chided. Okay, he responded. "It's someone from Cody's workplace, right? Even if it doesn't work out, don't be rude." Walter made a face at my reminder. "I want him to marry, but I know it shouldn't be forced. I just want Walter to find happiness. Nice to meet you. I'm Mary. The woman who entered with Cody was small and cute. Nice to meet you. I'm Ruby, Cody's wife. Cody always speaks highly of you. Thank you for coming today. I extended my hand, but she didn't shake it, and instead walked further into the house, saying, "Excuse my intrusion." Her attitude struck me as odd, but maybe that's just how young people are today. Were you cooking? Cody asked, entering behind her and looking at the dining area. Yes, I thought it was about lunchtime, I answered, puzzled by his question. Oh, Cody and I already had pasta. Sorry, she said in a flirting tone. Cody? Would you normally call your boss by their first name? Despite a lingering sense of unease, I remembered what Cody had mentioned before. In our department, everyone is on friendly terms and we call each other by first names. It seems he said that. Okay, I should have checked. My bad, I said, recalling his words and smiling. Come on, Walter, introduce yourself. At my prompt, Walter stood up and greeted her. Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Walter. I'm Mary. You look just like Cody. Handsome. No, I mean... Walter seemed embarrassed, but not entirely displeased. Later, she and Walter chatted in the living room. She's a nice girl, isn't she? Cody smiled. It seemed like he wasn't bothered by the odd feelings I had, being with her for just a few hours today. Yes, she is. What else could I have said in that situation? Later, Cody joined the conversation, and the three of them talked happily. Walter, who was initially reluctant, seemed to warm up to her friendliness. I convinced myself, if Walter is happy, then it's okay. That day, the three of them seemed to get along well, and ended up having dinner together. I was the only one preparing sushi, cooking, and shopping, but she didn't pay any attention. She didn't have to help, but the way she kept touching Walter and Cody, laughing loudly, made me uncomfortable. Though I intended to welcome her, I didn't like the idea of this new woman taking Walter away. With these thoughts, I continued preparing everything alone. I recalled how, when Amelia first visited our house, still a minor, she brought a cake and asked if she could help wash the dishes. I shouldn't compare, but the memory made me sigh. I wish for someone with that kind of consideration, I thought, watching the three of them laugh together from my isolated spot in the kitchen. But contrary to my thoughts, things progressed quickly. According to Walter, I don't like her in that way, but she's a nice girl, and maybe I'll come to like her. I was taken aback by such casual thoughts about marriage, but I was the one who encouraged it. I had no right to say anything. Cody really liked her, and Walter seemed to think the same. Eventually, they got engaged within 6 months of their first meeting. Walter and his wife offered to live with us. What a nice daughter-in-law to suggest living together in these times. Mary was well regarded by the neighbors. With a forced smile, I started our life together as a family of 4. Mary continued working, leaving and returning with Cody. They often came back late, so she didn't have time for housework. Apart from my part-time job, I was exhausted from the added chores. No, it was not physical tiredness, probably mental. Ruby, Mary would have preferred meat today. They would criticize the menu, or, we have a meeting today, so Cody and I will eat out, including Cody in their plans. It's good that they're close. However, I'm sure she's having Cody treat her to fancy meals. Mary, we need to save for the wedding, I would say, only for Cody to reprimand me. Mary is still new to our home and is trying to adjust. It's okay to dine out with her occasionally. Besides, I'm the one paying, so she's not spending any money. Cody reprimanded me. Despite my displeasure with this, Cody didn't seem to notice. We haven't dined out in a while. Why do you always have to go with Mary? Walter can take her, I argued, but Cody just laughed it off. His defense of her and Mary's occasional behavior bothered me, but I couldn't help feeling negative. I knew I was being petty, but I hoped Mary would realize it eventually. They had kindly offered to live with us. I really want to get along well with them. These feelings are genuine. Months later, the wedding day arrived. Cody and I prepared early. It was a homely party at Walter's request, and we greeted guests with the newlyweds. Many guests were common acquaintances since Cody and Mary worked together. Mary stood next to Cody, and Walter and I greeted the relatives. I'm truly grateful to the chief director for introducing me to such a wonderful person, Mary said humbly, referring to Cody by his title, though she usually used his first name. I wondered if she had a dual personality, but it was a joyous occasion. I stopped overthinking. Matilda, long time no see. Mary's mother, Matilda, greeted us. Mary's family lived far away. She was born to an older mother and raised by her single mother, a hard-working woman. She seemed strict but was delighted with Walter and Mary's marriage, even giving me gifts. Raised by Matilda, I couldn't give up hope that Mary would change. It was hard for the elderly woman to welcome guests. She had been contacted to arrive on time with her brother, and it seemed they had just arrived. It's us who should apologize for not being able to help, Matilda said, bowing her head. Not at all, I replied. Is Mary causing any trouble? She asked. I paused for a moment, but then smiled. She's working hard, and recently she and Cody even looked after our grandson, Scott. She's really become part of the family. Matilda seemed relieved by my words. Taylor and his wife also came. Our grandson Scott is now 4 years old. He seemed excited by the unusual atmosphere today, apparently having been overly energetic at home. By the time he arrived, he was sound asleep. Oh dear. I chuckled at his sleeping face. I was convinced that today would be a happy day with everyone here. The wedding began. The MC guided the event, but it was lively and informal. Mary and Cody were mingling with their colleagues, introducing Walter. Holding the still sleeping Scott, I told Taylor and his wife, "Eat while Scott is asleep." I was fussing over Taylor and his wife, telling them to eat while Scott was asleep. But holding Scott, I noticed Amelia being considerate. After encouraging them to eat at their leisure, I headed towards where Cody and the others were, still carrying Scott. I'm a good daughter-in-law, right? I could hear Mary saying this to a colleague, as if wearing a mask, even from a distance. Then she leaned in to look at Cody's face, seeking confirmation. She really is a wonderful daughter-in-law. I'm so happy that Walter has found such a great daughter-in-law. I felt a twinge of irritation at Cody's words, but inserted myself into the conversation. Hello, thank you for being here today. I'm Cody's wife, Ruby. When I greeted the colleagues, Cody introduced me to them as well. I received congratulations from the colleagues and thanked them with a smile. However, Mary, who heard Cody introducing me, seemed to sour her expression for some reason. Was she annoyed at not being the center of attention? I get along so well with my in-laws. Everyone in the neighborhood says I'm a good daughter-in-law. Right, Ruby? Mary said, turning to me. In the midst of this, she wrapped her arm around Cody's. Wait a minute. Even Cody seemed perplexed by this. Then she took Walter's arm with her other hand, as if claiming both men from me. Her triumphant look seemed to mock me. Then I heard a sweet voice. Grandma? Awake already? I asked. Yeah. It seems Scott finally woke up. Rubbing his eyes, still sleepy, he looked around. Trying to hide my agitation, I said, Cody, Scott's awake. And just then, the wrestling sister! Scott said, pointing at Mary with a happy smile. Wrestling? Mary? The colleagues around us started laughing. Hey, don't say such things. I scolded Scott. I didn't know what he was thinking, but Mary's face seemed to stiffen. Did she play wrestling with you the other day? I said, laughing it off. Scott shook his head. Because she was on top of Grandpa before. His words echoed among the colleagues. What? I muttered in surprise. Seeing Cody and Mary turn pale, I was at a loss for words. What? Mary was on top of Dad? Walter spoke up in my stead. His question stirred the venue into commotion. The laughter and smiles of the colleagues disappeared. Walter's voice must have been loud. It attracted everyone's attention. What do you mean by that? Walter shouted. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. Mary, still pale, forced a smile and said to Walter, When I asked him what he was doing, he said they were playing wrestling. Scott said, puzzled. On the bed? Walter asked Scott. Yeah. Walter spoke again, hesitantly asking, Were you wearing clothes? Scott shook his head in response, meaning they were not clothed. I felt drained. I almost collapsed. Holding Scott tightly to prevent dropping him, my legs wobbled. A colleague offered me a chair in response. No, it's just a 4-year-old speaking. Don't take it seriously. Cody laughed, but I could see sweat on his face. What do you mean? Did you get involved with a subordinate? And even your son's wife? The boss, who had arrived first and had been greeted by Cody and Mary, questioned. No, I didn't. Cody protested, but the boss looked stern. I'm not at fault. He forced himself on me. Mary pretended to cry, unconvincingly. I couldn't forgive Cody or Mary's behavior. I accused, Did you marry Walter just to live with Cody? Cody and Mary both looked at me. Hey, don't say such things! Don't believe it! Cody said hastily, trying to excuse himself. I've been suspecting something strange. If you planned this from the beginning, then your behavior towards me makes sense. I said, outraged. However, Mary, acting like an actress, shed tears and shook her head. Ruby, that's terrible! Who's really terrible here? Both of you! Get out of the house! Walter defended me. You're not wanted at the company either. We don't need people who disrupt the order. The boss added. The two finally seemed to grasp the seriousness of the situation. Mary, still pale, wailed, while Cody tried to ingratiate himself with me and the boss. The wedding ended in the worst atmosphere. I kept bowing to the departing guests, but everyone was kind, saying, It's not Ruby's fault. Don't push yourself. Their words were a small comfort amid the misfortune. The wedding was over, but the battle for me and Walter was just beginning. Taylor had a detailed conversation with Scott, and together, with Walter's words, the story became clear. Recently, when Taylor and his wife were out, we were looking after Scott. I was at my part-time job, and Cody and Walter's wife were supposed to watch him. It was not unusual for us to take care of Scott like this, so taking care of Scott in itself wasn't unusual. But on that day, while Scott was napping, Mary apparently expressed a desire to eat steak from a steakhouse in the neighboring town. Then shall we all go when Mom returns? Walter suggested. But Cody said, Ruby will be tired, so let's buy it and eat at home. Let's prepare for Taylor and his family too. Thinking Scott was asleep, Walter left alone. When Scott woke up from his nap, he peeked into the bedroom upon hearing Cody's voice. What followed was as everyone guessed. Scott witnessed them, and they made up a ridiculous excuse of playing wrestling, even telling him not to tell anyone. At the wedding, Scott, still half asleep, had forgotten about the promise. Walter, Taylor, and I confronted Cody and Mary with this information. It was against my will, Mary kept saying. So should we go to the police? Walter's suggestion silenced Mary, her face turning pale. Ruby, haven't we always overcome everything together? Cody pleaded with me. It seemed he didn't want a divorce. Yes, that's why I never expected to be betrayed like this. I retorted. I just gave in to impulse. Cody kept his head down, but Mary seemed displeased with his words. Wait, what? Gave in to impulse? Weren't you the one who said to marry Walter because you wanted to live together but couldn't divorce? Mary burst out angrily. Her words were inconsistent, sometimes denying, sometimes affirming. They seemed to have reached their limit with lies. The more they talked, the less their stories aligned. My sons and I sighed heavily at them. Seeing us, Cody and Mary bowed their heads again. It was truly pathetic. Was this the Cody I knew? I felt like crying. Anyway, pack your things and leave, I said. Ruby! Ruby! Both of their voices overlapped. Don't call me by my name! Even hearing my name from them was nauseating. For the divorce settlement, Mary owes me $20K, Cody owes me $10K, and Cody owes Walter $20K. Mary owes Walter $10K. A total of $60,000. I will make sure to claim it. They turned pale. Their hands trembled as if frozen. That's not enough for what Scott saw. Demand compensation for him too, Taylor. Walter spoke to Taylor. Yeah, the hurt Scott has can't really be compensated with money. Don't forget that. Taylor added. Cody bit his lip deeply. There might still be some awareness in him of being a grandpa. But even that awareness, just for today. Also, the mortgage of this house is mine. The ownership is mine. I have no obligation to let you stay, so this isn't a joke. They must have realized our seriousness. Despite my irritation at their silence, we must have inflicted at least half the damage we suffered. Walter and I looked at each other and laughed at the ridiculousness of the two. Eventually, the incident spread throughout the company, and they were forced to resign. Their severance pay, being joint property, was properly divided in the divorce. They had to borrow from relatives to pay the settlement. Everyone at the wedding was disgusted with Cody. I wondered if anyone would lend him money. Mary received an apology and payment from Matilda. Matilda, though deeply distressed and elderly, came to apologize, and I couldn't say anything against her kindness. Though she paid, it seemed she was cutting ties with Mary. There was a request to return to her parents' home because she lost her job. But she was told, "I don't know a child like you," and was dismissed. She is an adult now. She should take responsibility for herself and live her life properly. And as expected, the relationship between Cody and Mary didn't work out. They broke up. I heard rumors they were bad-mouthing each other, but I truly didn't care. Then, the life of just Walter and me began. It's a stress-free, happy, everyday life. Wonder if I should get married, Walter mused. Do whatever you like, I said, laughing it off. Walter was hurt by marriage. I couldn't push him towards another one. However, years later, Walter said he had something to tell me. I found someone I want to marry. I can't express how happy I was to hear that. The girl he introduced was a junior colleague at his company. What happens next is uncertain, but Walter and I still have so much ahead. Life is long. I believe there's always a path to happiness.